Judges are building a legal wall against Trump's transgender attacks. Stick around for this whole video. There's a lot to go over. I'm going to get into all of this. This is an article from Los Angeles Times from yesterday. It says these federal judges are building a legal wall against Trump's assault on transgender rights. President Trump wasted no time before turning the right wing's cherished assault on trans rights into government policy. On the very day of his inauguration, he issued an executive order titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the federal government. The order purported to recognize two sexes, male and female, as federal policy. These sexes are not changeable, it stated. It labeled gender ideology and gender identity as a false claim. The trans cases may have a more personal effect on millions of struggling youth and families. As I've written, the Trumpian hand-wringing over the mutilation of children via gender-affirming therapy or surgery melds medical ignorance with fantasy. Therapies such as puberty blockers or hormone treatments typically are administered to minors only after painstaking medical consultations, and actual surgeries aren't commonly performed on minors by reputable medical providers. Trump made an assault on transgender treatments a plank in his campaign platform, spinning a weird claim that schools had been subjecting innocent children to secret operations. The school decides what's going to happen with your child, he said, and many of these childs 15 years later say, what the hell happened? Who did this to me? None of that happens in the real world. Their target, Kerr writes, is a very small proportion of the population, roughly 2.8 million people above the age of 13. Not well understood by most Americans, living in ways that confounded common assumptions about sex. For the most part, this war has unfolded at the state level. North Carolina passed its notorious bathroom bill, requiring residents to use only the bathrooms designated for the sex on their birth certificates. So, in other words, for trans people, using the wrong bathroom in 2016. The measure drew widespread threats of boycotts by sports leagues and corporations, prompting its repeal the following year. Legislators soon found an approach more tolerable for the public, banning trans women from participating in women's sports. In 2015, there were 21 anti-trans bills introduced in state legislatures. In 2025, there were over 1,000. In the most recent ruling issued November 21st, federal judge Mark Kearney of Philadelphia took aim at subpoenas Pam Bondi served to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, purporting to be investigating the mislabeling and misuse of puberty blockers and hormones. The DOJ demanded the hospital's billing and insurance records, communications with manufacturers and sales representatives, and the names and complete medical and psychological records of children receiving gender-affirming care. Kearney quashed those subpoenas, ruling that the privacy rights of the children and their families substantially outweighs the DOJ's need to know the children's names, addresses, and treatments. He also focused on a declaration filed in court on October 6 by DOJ official Lisa Sau, stating that the government is aware of a lawsuit filed just this year with allegations of a minor being put on puberty blockers after his first visit and cross-sex hormones after his second visit with no meaningful assessment. Listen to this. As it happens, there was no such lawsuit. The day after Sau's declaration was filed, under penalty of perjury, they made this case up. Kearney's ruling followed one issued September 9th by federal judge Myung Jun of Boston. Jun quashed the entire subpoena issued to Boston Children's Hospital seeking extensive information about its personnel and medical records of patients, including social security numbers and home addresses. They're trying to get all this information about trans people and trans children. This is disgusting. It is abundantly clear, he wrote, that the administration's true purpose is to interfere with the state's right to authorize gender-affirming care and to harass and intimidate BCH to stop providing such care and to dissuade patients from seeking this care. In the third case, federal judge Jamal Whitehead of Seattle on October 27th threw out a subpoena the government served on QueerDoc. I did a video about this one previously, a telehealth provider serving patients in the West. The subpoena demanded complete personnel files for all QueerDoc employees and all private information about patients for whom it prescribed puberty blockers or hormones. Whitehead concluded that this subpoena, compounded by Bondi's news release, was aimed not to investigate legal violations, but to intimidate and coerce providers into abandoning lawful medical care. Whitehead also found that a legal filing in which the DOJ cited legal grounds for the subpoena represents a fundamental misunderstanding or deliberate misuse of court procedure. Filings of its kind generally were used to correct minor clerical errors in a previously filed document, not for making new legal arguments after the deadline. In this case, the filing underscored that the government was targeting the provision of gender-affirming care itself and not any legitimate federal violation. The government appealed the June and Whitehead rulings, though. The battle to protect treatment for transgender use is plainly not over. All right, let's get into my analysis. So the executive order Trump issued recognizing only two sexes in its title declares it protects women from gender ideology extremism. Doctors, researchers, and all major medical organizations say Trump was wrong that there are only two genders. But we already know this from research, evidence, and the existence of trans and non-binary and intersex people. So the only extreme ideology that's present here is the denial of what we already know to be true. And to go further, this legislation assumes that everyone in the US follows one exact religion, when there are over 10,000 religions that exist in the world. And 30% of the US population is religiously unaffiliated. They are called the nones, N-O-N-E-S. And 10 to 13% of the US identifies as agnostic or atheist. So Gen Z and millennials are more likely. 40% of Gen Z identifies as religiously unaffiliated. And I want to talk about the term biological truth. The word transgender already recognizes biological truth. It recognizes that a person is born given one gender and later identifies as another. There's no denial of a biological sex there. I also want to address the language that's used by the right. So Pam Bondi, who represents these cases in court, used terms like mutilated children and warped ideology. Nancy Mace uses trans slurs to falsely claim that trans people were responsible for Charlie Kirk's death. They call trans women biological men. This language is meant to dehumanize, demonize, and get a fear reaction from their base. They know that they can use the issue of trans rights to create a culture war because their base is uneducated on gender. The transphobic part comes in with the failure to recognize that there are more cisgender children that have these gender-affirming surgeries than there are trans children. So it's only a problem when trans kids do it. That's discrimination. They believe it's only appropriate. It's only inappropriate when a trans person uses these services, and that's discrimination. Sports